All right, so in this video, I'm going to do something completely different than I have ever done. So I typically like to cover very specific content. I work in Studio One 99% of the time, so a lot of the time it's very much focused in Studio One. But what I thought I would do in this video is I wanted to take a look at 6 different things that I've completely changed my mindset on in the last decade or so. Now, I will also say that I'm a really stubborn person. So for me to actually change my mind on something, it takes a lot. B, I'm also pretty OCD and I have a very specific way that I like to do things, and that's just part of my personality. It makes me good at figuring certain things out. It makes me good at figuring out really efficient ways to do things. And if I can't figure out an efficient way to do it, then to figure out a workaround or something like that. But this video, I want it to be completely different. So I have 6 things outlined over here, and I want to talk about them, and hopefully that I can keep things to a minimum in terms of how much I talk about each subject. All right, loudness in general. So first off, I will start off by saying that in general, I'm a huge fan of dynamics. I love all different types of music, different genres, and I would always err on the side of having something more dynamic than being completely squashed. That being said, over the past, I would say 3 years, I've started to have some kind of like a shift in mindset. Whereas before, I think I was being a bit of a dynamics snob, meaning that everything is too loud. And if you listen to things at equal loudness levels in terms of LUFS and you compare a dynamic mix to a loud mix, a dynamic will always win and that kind of stuff. I'm probably going to catch a lot of heat for this, but I'm going to just come out and say it because I'm really trying to be real in this video. I think having that mindset all the time, I think that is an excuse that we use as mixers for why our stuff doesn't sound as good as mainstream stuff. Oh yeah, but it's so loud. And if you played theirs against mine and it's the same mix, mine's going to sound better. That's not necessarily true. Some mixes, even if they're really, really squashed and you listen to them, they still sound better. That is not just about the mastering stage. That's also about the mixing stage. This is about loudness overall in general. So over the last 2 or 3 years, I've had a shift in how I feel about loudness, meaning that not every single song is completely like wide open and just tickling the needles of a bus compressor. If the genre is appropriate, I will be doing, aggressive parallel compression on source tracks or groups of tracks. I am a huge fan of using clippers and things like that so that I could keep the dynamics in the punch, but kind of shave off those transients, which could potentially just be like just poking right in your eardrum, things like that. So what do I say by this is not that I want all my mixes to be -8 LUFS or -5 LUFS. No. Loudness is always going to be dependent on the genre. So if you have a singer-songwriter, like a really intimate folk song, and it's just a couple elements, that is not going to sound right pushed to a certain level. It's important that you develop those tastes, you have an understanding of the genres, and also as you move up and you start working with a mastering engineer, that you work with a mastering engineer who understands your sentiments, your personal tastes, and who respects the vision of your work when you're a producer or a mixer, and you rely on their expertise to basically help you see your end product against a vision line, or against your end product and your vision across the finish line. So don't be a loudness snob. That's what I say to myself now. I used to always say, all right, if it's iTunes, we'll hit -16 and I don't need to go too loud. We don't need to go to -11 or -10 or -12. Guess what? If it sounds good and it fits the genre of the music and you're working with a mastering engineer or you're doing it yourself and you can do it tastefully, it's fine. It sounds great. It sounds fantastic. I've actually had cases where I had a mastering engineer give me a couple different choices. I chose the most dynamic and then I asked him to back off a little bit and he said, okay, yeah, no problem. And then at the end, after usually after I'm done a track, a long time will pass before I listen to it again. And then I listen to something maybe like a year later or something and I go, you know what? Yeah, you were right. Because even with the volume matching, okay, that happens when you have a track that's been absolutely squashed and you have volume normalization turned on so they play back at equal LUFS levels, it's it still sounded a little weak, and it could have used that extra punch that the original master had that I declined and said, can we back off? So that's how my views have changed in loudness. Now, use of effects, inline versus sends. When I started, I was taught a very, very specific way. I was taught when I was really young, when I was 11, I was taught by my dad on reel-to-reels with a mixer and some outboard, a couple outboard units like a spring reverb and things like that. I got taught a very specific way to do things. Now, when everything went over to digital and when everything went over to DAWs, I'm from Canada, and we had Long McQuaid's, and there was basically two guys in Canada that were the first guys who were basically certified to be Pro Tools instructors and who understood DAWs when they were just coming out to be mainstream, and not just in the pro circuit, but for like home studios. So you had like your 001 systems where you could run a computer and then you could basically have, you know, a 16 or 18 channel recording rig where you could make music in a home studio environment. I was taught a certain way by them as well, which was the same way that was with my dad. Now, when I adopted that philosophy, it was just in my mind, and you always work this very specific way. I find myself more and more, especially when producing, I will not always use an effects send and return in a conventional setup. If I'm working on something, I'm doing some production and I'm working with a synth element or something, I will put on potentially delays, reverbs, really super long like black hole or shimmer verb or something. It's going on very, very specific channels, and it's doing a very specific thing. And also, if you have something that maybe it's like a guitar amp or an acoustic guitar, I'm not afraid to take a room reverb and dial in, use the mix control to just give a little bit of ambience to give something some pop and dimension. Now, after those elements are mixed, they may go out and they may share a reverb with other elements, and I may have an instance where I'm basically putting a plate across everything or a gentle room reverb, whatever the case might be. But that's something that I've completely changed. It makes it much easier to export stems if you're doing production and you basically want to render a new set of stems for mixing, or if you're collaborating with people, it's much easier to just export one single channel that has all of the effects inline. So that could be EQ, compression, anything like that. So that's another area that I've changed my mindset on. I used to be really, really strict about it, and if I had things, I would have to create a bus channel and bus all those elements to one channel and then mix it down or record it internally. Now, if it's just getting its own little bit of sauce, I will definitely leave that alone and let it do its own thing. The next one, thinking things need a re-record. Okay, this is something that pretty much was mainly affecting me, I would say, like 10 or 12 years ago. I've always had a decent home studio. In some cases, I've had booths, a decent microphone collection, and pretty good gear in terms of good preamps and compressors and stuff like that, or EQs that I could use. So I've always considered myself to be a decent tracking engineer. So a lot of the times when you're working on smaller stuff, independent stuff, or even bigger stuff these days, you would get tracks that were recorded by people on their own. Now, when you listen to this, or when you have a quick run through, you may say, well, that's really, really great. It's a little muffled and I think we could get a better recording. So, you mark it down for a re-record. I find that more and more people are more comfortable actually recording themselves these days. And the technology is getting really, really good. So it really doesn't matter whether it's a 15-year-old kid that's recorded themselves with an SM7 in their living room, or it's a 20-something-year-old pop artist who is tired of working in studios and having to pay for things and has invested in a nice little recording unit, like maybe it could be a 26C or an Apollo or whatever the case might be. Don't count out tracks that other people have sent you thinking that you can do better. So this is kind of like me pointing fingers at myself. This is something I used to do a lot of. I would always want to do re-records to get everything as pristine as possible. So I got two thoughts on this. First of all, it's not a bad thing to want to get things sounding as great as possible, and having a really good starting point for what you've recorded is a great idea. But there's also some magic that comes from, demo tracks that sometimes it doesn't matter. You could go to the best studio in the world. The artist could be completely relaxed. You could be running through a $10,000 microphone and super expensive gear, the best preamps money can buy. And guess what? The performance that you captured at home on a 26C with an SM7 or really any microphone, just insert whatever microphone the artist is using, that might have more character. It might have more of a vibe. If it's something that's really bad, sometimes I'll make it worse to make it work. Sometimes if it's got like, I don't know, if it's got a bit of noise on it, or, you know, there's a couple parts that get a little raspy or something, I might mess it up even more. I might saturate it, might put a gate on it, and then I might re-record some other ones that can go in as layers, but have the primary element be this really gritty lo-fi thing. So not feeling the need to re-record material. And you know what? I'm pleasantly surprised that a lot of the tracks that I get sent to me, that somebody that's recorded themselves, they feel more comfortable recording their own vocals or something, they sound great. The technology is amazing these days, but it's more so about like just checking my ego and being like, hey, other people can do great work and there's nothing wrong with that, and it might have this amazing character. Not everything needs a re-record. Only if it absolutely needs it will the re-records happen. Okay, letting my idols influence my own personal tastes. I'm not going to name any names here. What I will say is that over the years, I have had and still have a number of idols and people that I look up to in lots of different genres. Anybody from like mixers to recording engineers or producers, things like that. One thing that I fell into the habit of, though, is basically if somebody was really vocal about something, maybe they would say something along the lines of, I never use compression, I always do vocal rides. And you'd listen to their end product and it's amazing. So you'd say to yourself, oh, okay. Well, I said this to myself, okay, I don't want to do anything crazy on compression. And anytime I want a compressor, I want it to be something invisible. So I fell in love with certain compressors that just had an amazing ability to go in there and do their thing without really artifacting the sound or anything like that. But guess what? So many times I would receive tracks from people, and maybe these would be like a rough vocal that was cut by somebody else, and they'd send me, back in those days, they'd send me like a Pro Tools session. And I'd hear the rough, and the rough would be printed, and I'd have it as a starting point so I can beat it for my mix. And I'd think my vocal's amazing, and then I'd pop their rough in, and I'd be like, I'm getting killed. And then I'd go to see what's happening in this vocal that I love, or I'd be watching another mixer mix, and I'm like, hey, your vocal sounds awesome. What is it? And I look, and it's like an LA2A emulation. Insert any brand, really. Waves, UAD, IK Multimedia, whatever. And it's just getting pummeled by compression. It's got like 15 dB of compression on it. And then it's got a simple low cut and then maybe a shelf or something. So I started to realize that I was letting other people's opinions influence my own personal taste. Now, the reality is, I love compression. I love different compressors for different things. I love super aggressive compression. I love super light compression. I love compression of all varying degrees. And this is something that I came to realize over the last 4 or 5 years. But before that, I was trying so hard to achieve a sound in my head that I wasn't hitting. I'd be kind of hitting it, but I wasn't quite there. And all I really needed to do was remove that barrier where, because one of my idols said, you know what, I don't like compression, I don't use compression, and you shouldn't either. It's good to know how to do everything, properly, or riding faders. All of a sudden, I was robbing myself of my own creative taste, and I wasn't even giving myself a chance to explore that route. Now, I won't turn to that just to rein in the dynamics of compression. That's not what I'm talking about. I can level out something with clip gain very smoothly and go through and do some rides, and I can get something to sip no problem. I'm fast at that, and I have a good ear for that. But when you want a certain sound, there's nothing like hitting an optical compression circuit, or there's nothing like hitting a FET compression circuit. It's just, if that's what you like, go for it. Don't let other people tell you something. Even if you really love their work, you idolize it, and their end product sounds amazing. Don't let anybody else basically kind of like push you into a single lane and not allow you to explore your own creativity and kind of think outside of the box and, try to experiment to develop your own personal sound. Okay, here's another one. Being afraid to be bold. I've had a lot of mixes done where got two stories here. So first of all, I've had a lot of mixes where I've balanced everything up and I was really happy with it. And people were like, it's great. It's like perfect. I can't believe it. I can hear every element. I hear it on an iPhone. It sounds good in my car. It sounds good, but I don't know what it is. Just something's not right about that mix. Something's messed up. I had a situation somewhat recently, actually, where somebody basically, we were talking about one specific element and placing it. And I think they made a comment like that could come up a bit. And I said, yeah, let's bump it up a little bit. And I bumped it up 0.5 or 0.7 or something. And basically what they said to me was, hey, either pull it down altogether or push it up like 5 dB. And I was like, 5 dB? My mix is so nicely balanced and I've been working so hard on the static and the balance. And they said, no, that's great. But like either dive in or get out of the pool. That was basically the analogy they said. So long story short, I pushed this one element up super loud. And I was like, oh, but guess what? It worked. And then I started to think about it, and there are really specific songs that I can remember where there is that situation, right? I can think of All of the Lights by Kanye, where the first time I heard that, hearing that loud tom that was panned off, and it felt like it was 6 dBs on top of everything else. But guess what? That's what made it magic, and that's what I love. And if somebody was driving down the street and you heard that song blaring out of your window, you'd hear that one element poking out over everything. But if you put that into like a place where you just thought from a balance perspective, I don't think it would be the same mix. It wouldn't be as captivating. It would be boring. So I have been afraid to be bold for a long time. And that is something that for the last, I would say 3 years, I've been trying to throw that out the window. And it really came to my attention when I was mixing this one particular song and I had the artist on the other end over a virtual Zoom call. And somebody was like, man, just turn it up. Yeah, more, 4 dB, 5 dB. And it was just like, and it worked. So being afraid to be bold, that's something that I've changed. Last one, this is something that took me a really long time. And again, I think this is pride and ego for a lot of us, is when we talk about proper use of room correction and room correction tools. So I'm splitting these up into two categories because room correction is doing things where you measure out your room and you try to optimize the physical location of it. You're doing things like putting up baffles, putting bass traps, taking care of reflective surfaces, and basically getting your room as amazing sounding as a starting point before you even do anything else, so that you have a room that translates well. It doesn't have a lot of excessive buildup of frequencies and things like that. For the longest time, I operated under the assumption that I know my room very well, and I know the headphones that I use very well, and things like that. And guess what? Those are basically, at the end of the day, they're excuses for not actually sitting down and listening to people and what they're saying to you and saying, hey, just do some work, get this sounding a little bit better, and you're going to have much better translation. You'll be able to hear a more accurate representation of the material that you're working with. I can't tell you how many times I would listen to something and it'd be really great, and I would get to work on an element. I might put a low cut, and then I'd hear some buildup at 837, and I'd hear something else, and start going in with Oxford suppressor and dynamic EQs and getting it sounding just right and everything like that. And then when I would do that, then it would change the relationship and the balance against other elements. So I'd start moving back and forth between everything, and I'd get it sounding great, and I'd think I've done the most amazing thing, and I would send it off, and the feedback would come in, and it would be like, this sounds amazing. I can hear everything's crystal clear. Everything's got its own space. Love the vibe, like the ambience, the effects you've used, but like the guitar is missing something. Like I actually like the guitar better in the rough, and you'd go back to the rough, and it may have just been a low cut or whatever the case might be. So if you start hearing those types of things, then it's a good indication that if you need to do tons of work on stuff and then the feedback comes back that, hey, can we just listen to the rough again and listen? If you've done a bunch of things to it, it might be that you're not hearing things correctly. So in my case, that was, positioning of things, some room treatment, things like that, but also just thinking that I've been using the same set of headphones for 20 years and I know them very well. That really doesn't mean anything if you've been listening to something that's not accurate. So that's the other thing that I've done is I've basically went on a search for 2 pairs of headphones that I know and trust really, really well. I have Oppo PM3s. These ones here, they don't make them anymore, but I literally bought a used pair based on recommendations and frequency responses. I took a chance and I couldn't be happier. And these things are deadly accurate, and I don't even need any room correction for the mid-range to be accurate. They have a couple areas where they're a little warm on the top end and the super bottom end isn't what it should be. In those cases, I can pop on a room correction curve. My choice is SonarWorks. There's lots of other places. The other ones I use is the Olo Audio S4X. These are my open back. So I have... And these ones, I actually have them set to a custom curve where basically above, I think 1K and above, I'm doing nothing to them. And on the bottom end, I'm just bringing up the lows a bit. So this helps me hear things the way that I hear and the way that my taste wants to hear things. And then my mixes translate very well. I can hit a mix, my version 1 mix. If I go into a car, there's no glaring problems where my sub is way too loud or the vocals are completely off. Usually from that point, it's like, okay, let's ride this up a bit in this section. Let's maybe bring the overall reverb down or up a little bit. Maybe we can throw some delay throws. But it's usually my first pass at a mix usually comes up pretty accurate. So this is something I didn't pay attention to. And the funny thing is, this would have been the easiest thing to do at the very beginning. It would have been really easy to just actually go out and seek out some really good advice, order some bass traps, build some baffles, somebody who has already done that in their studio. Usually we have friends who are into this type of thing. Friends always want to help each other out, invite somebody in, say, what do you think? And they might say, yeah, well, we could try doing this. And then, of course, you have some different tools that are available now, which are amazing. Things like SonarWorks. There's other services and other softwares that are available too as well. It's fairly easy to measure your room and calibrate things or run plugins that can help with translation. So these are the areas which I have completely kind of changed my mindset on in the last, let's say, 12 years, or maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depends on which item in this list we're talking about. But every single one of these changes that I made, and every single one of basically setting aside my opinions as being blocked in stone and stop being so tunnel visioned and allow myself to think, that other people may have suggestions or some of these things that you're very locked in on, it might be time to evolve and open yourself up to some change. So these are the ones for me. These are the main ones I can think of right now. I'm sure that anybody watching this video, if you've made it to the end, I'm sure that you've probably have a list of your own of some things that you're kind of wondering if you should try. I would just advise to be open to experimentation, be open to change, be open to thinking that maybe the way that you've been doing something for a long time, that there's other ways that would work well in addition to that. So, not my usual type of video at all, but I would probably say for me, this type of video would be the type of video that I would have loved to have seen when I was starting, that could maybe have saved me, 5 or 10 years of making bad mix decisions or bad decisions in general, or having a bad attitude towards certain things. Anyways, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next one. Cheers.